You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next 60 minutes, probably, we're going to be talking about Lucky Day, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Matt.
You've learned the word and. A new word for
Yeah,
your vocabulary, Matt.
yeah. It didn't feel natural. I thought
We could tell. We could tell.
hi, I'm Matt
I,
is perfectly sufficient. But if you want me to say and, in case people get confused,
I took that black archive on the demons without the word and in the site. It was a miracle of writing.
some black archives have an and in the title, and this one didn't. Won't say.
Exactly.
Well, Doctor Who and the Demons is probably Doctor Who and the Demons, and the Silurians is probably the only one that
Uh,
does.
I was thinking more of the authors rather than the
Time and the
archives.
Rani,
Oh yes, very good, John. Time in the running, and I suppose
Vincent and
they
the
do the
Doctor.
modern series, so there'll be a
Yes.
dot and bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Smith and Jones.
Yes, very good. So that's at least
Edge,
four
edge,
potential.
and destruction.
Okay, right, let's move on. Okay, so we had a first episode that involves modern tech and arrested development. We had a second episode that involves modern media entertainment coming to life. We had a third episode that involves somebody being rooted to the spot in a terrifying alien environment. And now we've had a fourth episode where we've got Ruby Sunday going on her own without the Doctor, and there's an incel stroke whatever involved at the heart of it. So, as things stand, we're all on track for Sutex still at the end of the year.
The and the Highlanders. If I'll think of more.
Excellent. Well, it's going well so far. Matt, okay then. Just to try and get your mind off the subject of Doctor Who titles that have the word and in them, what did you think of this?
I really like this. I really like this one. I
Did
I
you?
I
You
agree
did?
that I agree that it was a kind of a sort of a regurgitation of some ideas from previous RTD seasons. But
Even this season, frankly.
I really liked the kind of slight moral complexity behind it. I liked what it's saying about units. I don't think it's a direct kind of preparation for the standalone unit series, but I think in terms of the moral questions it asks about unit, I think I'd like to see that sort of stretch out into the upcoming series. I liked having a bit of a break from Gatwa, who I like, but he's a very intense performance. So having him just bookend the episode, I was completely on board with Ruby Sunday and Millie Gibson. Um, yeah, I thought, just as it was starting to sort of become
Well,
a
we'll
bit
get back to
conventional,
that
it twisted.
because,
So yeah,
yeah,
I
there's
was on board with that. This
it
one.
changes about three times, doesn't it? Well,
Yeah.
there's a very definite big change at one point, but I think there's a couple of other moments at which it sort of changes too. And I suppose we'll come to those.
Mm.
Um, I will say if Elon Musk ever catches sight of this episode, that is definitely the end of the Disney deal, isn't it?
He's got nothing to do with Disney. It's fine.
Well, he's not, but they are trying to, well, they're trying to bully companies like Disney into doing what they want, aren't they? And as big as
Absolutely.
Disney is, the President of the United States is quite a force to be reckoned with when he controls what laws you have to make your product under. So,
True. But then the governor of Florida has a say, and they saw him off. So it,
yeah, but my wider
it
point
would
is,
benefit
I,
no
s-
one. Yes.
I suspect that Republicans under Trump could look at this and think, oh, this is sort of criticizing big government. They
Yeah.
would see themselves as the heroes
yeah,
potentially
yeah, yeah. Oh, well.
because it's not entirely clear cut. I mean, there are good
Well,
guys
no,
and
it's
bad
not.
guys in this, but it's not.
No, let's get back to that because I think that's the most interesting point about the whole thing. So I want to have a proper talk about that. John, did you like it?
I enjoyed it. It is
You
essentially
enjoyed it too.
yeah, I loved it. It's an essentially
You
an
loved
inversion.
it.
Yeah, it's an inversion of
Yeah.
one of my favorite episodes. So
Oh, what was your favorite episode that it's an
one of
inversion
them,
of?
it's Love and Monsters inverted.
I suppose it is in many ways.
Yeah, because you get the Doctor encounter at the start, and
Yes.
it's positive, and then you get to him pursuing the Doctor, stroke unit.
Yes, again, in many ways, there's nothing really new here at all, is there?
No, but
But
it's in a different voice. 'Cause it's obviously it's Pete McTighe. It's not that
Yeah.
Russell T Davies style. It's not played for lightly or for comedy.
well, and also, I think as well as having a slightly different voice, and I agree, it does have a different voice. I think it does. I think this is, to me, this did feel quite distinct from the Russell T Davies stories that we've had so far this year and from the whole of last series, in a way, maybe apart from 73 yards. Obviously, it shares a lot with 73 yards. I
Mhm.
don't think you can really sort of argue with that. But I did feel it slightly did have a different author's voice. So I think you're right. And maybe we'll come back to that point too. There's so many points and I've got no notes, so we'll have to try and remember to get back to these things. I can't believe you both loved it because I did too.
Oh, that's good news.
3 for 3.
It looked really good as well. The direct, we'll have to talk.
Yeah.
Let's come back to the direction, but there were some
Well, no, let's
moments
do that now because
of
fair
really
enough.
good-looking direction.
I,
Just the sort of thing that Lee Rawlings would hate. Like real sort of kind of. It's not really happening. It's sort of symbolic moments.
do you know
So
what? There was a weird moment where I'm thinking, oh, they've shot those two aliens really badly, so that it looks like just a pair of human beings in costumes. What a stupid thing to do to put that shot on. I'm sure they could have done something better. Oh, what an idiot I am.
Yeah, that was great.
yeah,
Yeah, same guy who directed Robot Revolution, isn't it? Peter Hall. 'Cause I thought
Yeah.
that looked really nice as well. Again, a couple of quite nice symbolic moments towards the end of that.
yeah, yeah.
It's
But yeah,
basically the same episode, really, isn't it? In some ways, in some ways. Yeah, and so, okay, yeah, it looks great. I did have a couple of caveats. So, Pete McTighe's script, it kind of needs to do about four very distinct different things, and it needs to get you on board with each of those things. Otherwise, it doesn't quite work. So it needs to convince you that this guy is a potential love interest for Ruby. You need to see him as a potential love interest for her. And you need to, in order to buy into that, you need to see her as a potential love interest for him, despite the Doctor connection. So it could have been. So, I mean, Russell T Davies made this play in Love and Monsters, didn't he? Where Thingamajig's character actually
Elton Pope. Yeah, Mark
Elton
Warren.
Pope actually falls for, not maybe completely in a romantic sense, but he does fall for Jackie in many ways. And he really starts to empathize with her and he really starts to connect with her on a human level. And then when she discovers that the disguise of the whole thing was because he was interested in her daughter, that's when the whole thing unravels. And actually, he was genuine by this point, and that whole thing knocks him sideways completely. Now, here, it needs to convince you that that relationship is exactly the relationship that you had with Elton Pope, where the thing that draws him in is the fact that she's been in the TARDIS, but the thing that keeps him there is that he falls in love with her. And that's the first thing that the script and the direction and the acting needs to convince you of. I didn't quite think it made it. So I'm not sure if that was deliberate because it wanted to keep you at arm's length slightly because of the twist that was to come. But I thought the twist that came wasn't quite as strong as it could be because I didn't quite feel that relationship worked. But I just put it down to these are two actors who've just met, who've got to make 45 minutes of television, who've got 3 weeks to do it, and they didn't quite get the chemistry right. I
I
don't know. What do you think?
I felt slightly different about that. So I kind of bought into the dates that they were going on as being genuine,
Yeah, yeah,
but I found because he's set up as a child as having a sort of
yeah,
rocky childhood already, she's set up in the dates as having PTSD, so not necessarily making the right decisions. He's set up as an adult as being slightly stalkery, sort of engineering. But I think all of these things were slightly intentional. They're the kind of the point that they're sort of seeding this twist. I didn't see the exact twist coming. I saw something coming. I didn't see their relationship as being particularly strong. I saw something coming, but the kind of the dramatic nature of the twist, the fact that he was completely engineering the situation, I didn't see.
Oh
I
no.
see. I thought it did come across me as genuine on Ruby's part. She is kind of
Yeah,
desperate for that connection, and he is exploiting it. And all we learn about his character through the episode, he's a deceitful git, basically.
yeah.
So he wouldn't necessarily know how to make that relationship genuine. So I thought that was a deliberately played note.
But I think he was pretty convincing at the start. For me, it just felt like they hadn't quite got the chemistry between the actors. But like you say, that could be a deliberate choice because
Yeah,
of what happens after. I
it
just didn't quite believe the relationship quite, and
it
I
felt
suppose you're not meant to
it
in
felt
some ways.
initially it felt a little bit as if a Doctor Who fan meets a prominent Doctor Who actor and they begin a kind of that it felt like that's what those dates would be like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with the kind of that sort of imbalance.
Oh, you'd be
Um,
like David Tennant meeting Georgia Moffat.
but
Peter Davison's daughter.
possibly, but she's definitely not a Doctor Who fan. I think she appreciates Doctor Who for the big finish that has been brought to her. But yeah, I wasn't actually thinking of any particular examples, but it made me feel that there was
I've
a sort
had
of
a chance.
a power imbalance. Um, and I kind of found that creepy and unsettling. So I wasn't that sort of stopped me from buying into this kind of I didn't think Ruby had found her forever person to
The
start with.
one, oh, go
And
on.
I
We
didn't
sorry,
mind that.
we
I didn't mind that. I didn't mind
yeah,
that
yeah.
because that gave me a kind of a reaction to what was happening on screen. I was sort of uncomfortable with what was happening on screen, and you know, it
The
kind of
one
worked.
weird no, and I suppose it makes a kind of sense, but I don't think they quite put a pin in the sense that it makes, is when he puts this thing out on social media saying, "Have you seen this girl?" And she just walks in his door and quite happily talks on the podcast.
Yeah.
And that felt like it needed explaining why she might do that. And I think there's an explanation there to be had that she's got this PTSD from being with the doctor, and she basically just needs to get it off her chest. But it didn't feel like they made that point. It felt like I had to bring that point to it myself.
And by the end of the episode, I thought that was actually again, I'm hoping it sort of feeds into the standalone unit series that unit doesn't seem to offer this kind of PTSD therapy or counseling. So she goes to Kate Lethbridge Stewart and says, I'm really struggling with things and blah blah blah. And Kate Lethbridge Stewart basically ends up by saying, well, get away and once you feel better, get back in touch and you can start all over again.
Yeah,
There's
but the
no
funny,
sort of
yeah,
there's no sort of care in unit for
But
the
Unit is kind of a PTSD recovery session for old companions at the minute.
yeah,
well
yeah. And there is that weird line at the end where she says, "When you feel ready to, just get in touch and we can talk."
yeah.
So it's almost like what Matt says is both true and at the same time completely wrong because both things seem to exist at the same time, don't they?
Well, I think it's sort of, and again, I think it's this is RTD, I think, retooling Unit again because he retooled Unit in 2008 or whatever to be a kind of a scientific research kind of focusing on the intelligence part of Unit rather than the military part of Unit, but it's gradually become militarized through the
In
sort of Torchwood years, and now it's back being a military organization, and that I know
Well, it's
that
telling that Pete McTighe is the other writer on. I'm right, isn't it? It's Pete McTighe is the
Yes,
other writer
yes.
on War Between the Land and the Sea. So,
right.
yeah.
So it's sort of more militarized now, and I know that makes a lot of this generation of viewers uncomfortable in a way that didn't seem to matter in the 1970s. Having a an unofficial paramilitary organization based in Hampshire in the 1970s didn't seem to bother people as much as it would now. And I think that kind of slight conflict between the military nature of unit and their sort of unofficial status, I think that's going to be something that comes up again. And that's started here, I think.
Well, that's just reminded me of something I want to bring up at the end of the thing. So
You're
I
making a
am.
Yeah.
note.
I do find odd
I
that
mean,
Unit
people,
weren't kind of aware
I've
that
just made
there was a
myself.
podcast looking to out them or a
yeah.
social media influencer.
No, I think there's a central theme in this episode that is absolutely fundamental to how it works and might be fundamental to what happens in the rest of the series in a way. And I want to bring it up, but I don't want to bring it up now because if I bring it up now, it'll derail the conversation. So I've just made myself a note of that so we can come back to it later. Because I
Is that
do
the
want
first
to.
note you've ever made for this podcast?
No, it's not because I made a
It's-
bunch of notes for the first episode, and then because I made those notes, I kept referring to the notes and forgot to talk about all the other things that I thought were so obvious, I didn't write them down. And because I hadn't written them down, my mind was
yeah.
focused on the notes. I hate making notes, but I'm going to put that down just to make sure that I do come back to it at the end of the episode.
Okay.
So the second thing that it needs to convince you of is the sort of away day and the friends and the sort of situation in the village. Oh, by the way, did you notice the writing on the sign? The
Lyme
bus stop.
Regis, Exeter. Yeah. So
The,
it's somewhere in Chibnall land, basically.
it's Dorset, yeah, but the destination was, and they got it pretty accurate as well. So they obviously looked at an actual bus route because the actual bus route is the bus route from. I couldn't tell you where in Dorset, but I think they were just west of Dorchester. So they're between Dorchester and Lyme Regis, and that bus terminates at Exeter, having travelled through Honiton and Clisthoniton, and they're all there on the sign,
Okay.
including Axminster on the way. It's a bit slightly windy journey.
I was going to say it's a
Do,
long one, isn't it?
do we know where the village is that they filmed? Presumably Wales.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been down here,
No, it's
but
down Porth Corway. I think it was on the Unleashed.
yeah, but I've spent some time there. Part of some of my family are from those parts, so I definitely, and obviously, I live at the terminus, right? So that was a nice point. The village, though, so the promotion. So I think this is one of those occasions where I think because I knew very little going in, I knew a tiny bit, but very little really. I think the promotion actually did this episode a huge service because the promotion basically said, Ruby Sunday, she goes on this podcast, she gets into this relationship, and then it turns into the demons. And the sort of second half hour of the episode is basically in a village in a demons type situation, and so, as a viewer, I think when you get to the village, you're thinking, right, they've reached the destination, and now we have a story that unfolds here. And of course, 10 minutes after they get to the village, there's this huge twist, and it turns out it's not really about the village at all. But I thought that was a great piece of promotion in that they were setting you up not to expect that kind of a twist. So even if you were getting slight hints that that twist was coming, that the relationship wasn't real, that there was something about him, you saw when he was a kid, like John said, that there was something about him that wasn't quite right. And then you kind of think, oh, he's got past that. Everything's fine. And it's actually going to be a sort of base under siege, except the base that's under siege is the village pub, right?
Mhm.
And so did the stuff. So here's the second sort of. Did this convince you? The stuff in the pub, the friends. Did you find that convincing too? Because again, I wasn't quite convinced by that, and now I'm thinking, was that deliberate or was that just because? Again, you've got 5 or 6 actors. You're supposed to be convincing the audience that they're all best friends, and clearly they do know each other because they're colluding on this. But I didn't quite buy the chemistry. But I think that's just a function of the way Doctor Who's made. But again, it could be deliberate. I don't know. What did you think?
It comes up twice. I think it's deliberate.
Yeah, yeah. I think you could be right. But I think if that's true, if it is deliberate, I think it slightly undermines the episode because I think it slightly gives it away. Because I will tell you the one problem I had is that up till the sort of 20, 25 minute mark, whenever it was that the twist came, I did get bored, slightly bored a couple of times of just watching the same thing seem to be unfolding without much what seemed like forward momentum. So, I, because I wasn't convinced, I was slightly bored with watching the characters until the twist comes. So I don't know. I'm not sure if it quite works or not. Matt, did you
I'm,
have
I,
any?
d- I can see. I think there was a moment where I felt like I knew where this was going, and that sort of inevitability. Once they got to the village, it felt, oh, this is where they save money.
Yeah,
But it's nice. It's set in a village. They can explore the village. They can use the village to its fullest advantage. Then it becomes a sort of character piece where they're building the different friends up. So it's a bit like A bit like what's the one with David Suchet in it? Knock,
Knock knock. Yeah, yeah.
knock. So it's a bit like that. They kind of build up, and it becomes a sort of bottle episode. So I was sort of ready for that.
Well, Father's
Um,
Day in the church.
yeah.
So
So
same thing
actually,
basically.
I was sort of a bit disappointed when the twist came and it went back to Unit HQ briefly because I like village set stories.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like this
yeah.
idea of sort of using this kind of the claustrophobic nature of the village. Um, but actually, then that's compensated because for once you go back to the standing unit set, but you feel like you have quite an expansive story that, that goes a long way. I mean, this is the opposite of Lux, which is basically outside the cinema and inside the cinema. This has gone, bits in London, bits in Dorset, then back to Unit HQ. So it feels like it goes on a geographical journey.
Yeah, I mean, JR was talking about this last week. It's quite an outdoor episode in some
Hmm.
ways.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
it feels that way, even though, it's got about as
Actually,
much outdoors as the Goblins episode.
Yes.
in fact, probably less even
Yeah.
because I mean, literally, there's a couple of scenes in a street in the village and a handful of very short things with him, and a lot of the rest of it is sets. There's even stuff. I mean, the very first scene at the start where they bump into the kid in the middle of town underneath the London Eye is in a set clearly.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of it was in sets that didn't necessarily have to be, but that's the nature of how they make it.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe another slight caveat with this, and again, it's a sort of it's the thing about the 45-minute episode, is that a lot of it didn't feel like it really got dug in too much. To the line in the second half, maybe about 35 minutes in, where he arrives at unit, the bit, once he gets into the unit base and he's standing there with a gun in front of him, and he kind of says something, I can't remember what it was, but he says something like, "Oh, I've set up this social media thing. We've brought you down. We've told the world the truth." And I'm thinking, well, really, have you? Because it's only 5 minutes since you actually turned the cameras on. And some of it didn't feel quite as substantial as it might have if they'd have had an extra 15 minutes to play with and could have convinced us slightly more,
Yeah.
which is what they tried to do with the montage of the TV presenters, right? But
Mhm.
I guess that's a function of the 45 minutes, and it's not really a complaint.
I
It's
think
just a thing, I suppose.
it's a shortcut
Yeah.
because what I and I again I think what this is doing is setting up because they've made this miniseries, the standalone miniseries. It can't just be Sea Devils versus Unit on a beach shooting one another. There has to be
Yeah,
a
yeah.
degree of moral and political complexity to it. A bit like God help us, Spectre. That kind of, the government's clearly not sure about Unit. Unit's not sure about the government. So it's that kind of conspiracy
Well, and
to,
potentially you get a Sea Devil in the lockbox that Unit have
Mhm.
got the shriek in, right? And that
Yeah.
is can be a source of moral
Yeah.
complexity too, right?
So that means that the think tank stuff in here is kind of a means to an end. It's a tool to crack open this or to start this kind of storyline rolling, in a way that also gives Ruby Sunday maybe an ending that she didn't get in the previous series.
Where she
She's
can
sort
walk
of
away with her
yeah,
own agency, sort of thing.
slightly, yeah, and she gets a lot of screen time, and an open-ended ending maybe, so she can always sort of come back into the fold. But it also kind of is a tool to crack this storyline about her PTSD and what happens after, which has been done before, but in this case, it's sort of told in a slightly original way, I think.
And it's also a tool to get to the sort of last 5 minutes. So
Mm.
this does again. So I mean, I think we'll come back to some of these things because I think some of them deserve more conversation. But okay, let's get to that last bit. Again, this finishes with 7 minutes to go. And you think, oh God, is Pete McTighe doing a Russell T Davis where we get 5 minutes in the living room at the flat before the episode ends, where you learn lots of character stuff, but you don't actually see it as part of a narrative. You basically get told it as an afterthought after the story itself has finished. And I thought, oh God, if we go there, that will have ruined a half decent episode. And instead, you get a scene that I think is the scene that makes the episode what it is. And to give Pete McTighe his dues, He spends the entire episode building to this place. But because it's a Dr. Light episode, you don't necessarily expect this to be where the episode gets to. But it's the confrontation between Conrad, is it? It's Conrad, isn't it?
Hmm.
And the Doctor. Is Conrad clearly coming back? He is, isn't he? Oh, yes, he is, because you get that twist at the end where Mrs. Flood lets him out. So clearly
Yeah.
Conrad's back for the finale, right? I think it basically goes without saying. He has to be. This is setting up the finale. In fact, it's weird the amount of stuff that this episode is doing for the series, given that it's a non-RTD one. But you can see that Pete McTighe is somebody that RTD has brought in. So it's not just the war between the land and the sea, but this sets up the whole, oh, somebody told me I was going to meet somebody called Belinda Chandra. And then it also sets up the finale as well in some ways.
But
In
it's the
ways,
only episode they can do this in because nothing else is going to be contemporary Earth.
well, yeah, but it's not just that. It's bringing the threads together. So Conrad is clearly going to be a thread, or what Conrad represents is going to be a thread. So going back to the robot revolution, I think that's foreshadowing for Conrad, frankly, in some ways. And then Mrs. Flood is obviously a thread, and so you bring two threads together here that are going to be together in the finale, presumably Conrad and Mrs. Flood. Ruby Sunday, clearly the sort of whole PTSD thing for me is setting up something about the ending too. I mean, it might not be a major part of the ending, but he's there are lots of wheels in motion, lots of threads in play, and just depends which ones they pull on, right? But I think what really makes the episode is that confrontation between Conrad and the Doctor, and so this is the note that I made because this has always been the problem with Doctor Who, hasn't it? And people have brought this up many times. There are certain things. Is this the thing that they call the trolley problem? There are certain things that you can't confront in Doctor Who. So one of those things is when you say, "Oh, we've landed in the sort of time of racism. Why can't you just do something about racism, Doctor? You fix everything else. Why can't you fix racism?" Well, because we know, because we live 75 years in the future, that it doesn't get solved. So you can't have the Doctor solving it. So
But they,
Doctor
they
Who,
do answer that in Lux as well. The
well,
Doctor answers
yes.
it in Lux,
Well, and I
which is a
think,
brave thing.
well, and I think, I don't think he does answer it there. I
Well,
think,
it's a non-answer, which like any kind of it's like techno babble. It's emotional babble.
but what I'm saying is, I think Russell T Davies, I thought that was a throwaway thing, and I thought he fluffed it because he doesn't answer it. He doesn't answer. I don't think he answers it in any way. I think he's setting up this episode with that. I don't think it's a case of, oh, I'm foreshadowing something that's coming. I think he
Oh, I
knows
don't
what's.
know.
It
I
might be, but
because Wish World, it
well,
implies that
yeah.
people are getting their wishes realized. The Doctor is being shown in a lot of places of trying to basically overwhelm hearts and minds, but he can't tell people what to think. That's not his way.
Well, that's it. That's what this episode ultimately is about, isn't it? Doctor Who is a fantasy that just can't deal with reality, and Think Tank is a reality. I mean, whether this is actually supposed to be the same think tank you've got in Robot, right? This could be some kind of weird setup for that, or maybe we are in some kind of alternate universe, or literary agent hypothesis, right? Maybe I'll come back to that thought because that's basically what I'm talking about with Mrs. Flood and Ruby, when I've spoken about this in the last couple of weeks. Think Tank, Conrad represents the real world. Doctor Who is a fantasy that, will talk about things that are happening in the real world but can't actually deal with them. I think the real kernel of this episode is that Pete McTighe has made the villain of this episode of Doctor Who, for possibly the first time, certainly in this way, the real world. So the villain of this story is not Conrad or Mrs. Flood or Think Tank or the Shrieks or whatever. The real villain of this story is the real world. What happens when Doctor Who has reality knocking on the door and you can't do anything about it? And there's a brilliant moment at the end, isn't there? They have this brilliant confrontation. And I think it's the first time we've seen Ncuti Gatwa play it that real. Because when he does it in Dot and Bubble at the end, I think he goes a bit too far. I think he goes a little bit over the top. Here, he plays it totally cold, steely, and real. I think
He's more comfortable in the role, I think, here.
yeah, I think it's a fantastic performance. and he says all this stuff, and you think, oh, he's got the killer line at the end, and I can't remember what Conrad says, but Conrad just, oh no, he says to him, right, thank you, Doctor. Now you get off my world, and it's just that is the moment when the real world and Doctor Who bump up against each other, and I don't think you can answer that, but I wonder if that is setting up the two-episode finale. So actually, for the first time, I'm actually feeling quite excited to see where he goes at the end, and I'm just really sad that it's Russell T Davies writing it rather than Pete McTighe.
It's a
But it's
really
interesting
nice,
to
yeah.
see where all these things are going. Sorry, John?
It's, I mean, it is partly a comment, particularly it's appropriate this week, with the results from local elections.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's where it is, how do you convince reform voters not to vote for reform? You can't. There is
No,
no
exactly.
one easy answer. And
No.
that's fundamentally what the episode's saying, which is why I thought it's really, really powerful, that scene.
It is because he talks about exactly what's happening in politics, exactly how it
It's
works.
the liberal dream speech. It's the stuff you
And
give
yet,
Capaldi at the end of the Zargon, and Capaldi absolutely sells that speech.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But ultimately, it's almost too pat as an answer.
Uh,
It's a truth, but it
But this
solves
is what
nothing.
this is why I think it's not going to get into trouble that much with the right wing, because I think the right wing will actually, you know, or that level of the right wing, all the conspiracy theorists, or actually it's more Piers Corbyn is kind of libertarian left that it's criticizing this time. Um, and they'll sort of think that think tank have a point.
well,
And
yeah,
I think they kind
in
of
some
do
ways
have
they
a
do.
point. They do
Yeah.
have a point.
Is it
Well,
saying
that's
that
it.
you exit?
It is. It's weird that mid last week we had a sequel to Midnight that really didn't have anything to do with anything, frankly, because here the main point that Midnight makes is that bit when the Doctor says, "You should trust me because I'm clever," i.e., what he's saying is, "You should trust me because I am cleverer than you." And anybody you say that to is basically just going to say, "Well, you can fuck right off then, can't you?" Because when you talk down to people like that, that is the opposite of how you can bring them on side. And this episode again is confronting that. And so, yeah, you're right. They may not have a point politically, but they have a point on a social and personal level.
And
I
It
it's
think.
res
mud.
it resonates for someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fuzzed slightly because Conrad's framed as such an asshole and a villain. But actually, from his perspective, what he's saying is unit's got a lot of secrecy. There, we don't know where this money is going.
That's what I mean
They
about
they're
that
making
last
stuff
scene.
up. Yeah,
Everything the Doctor says is true and
yeah.
great, and everything Conrad says is equally true and terrible. And the two things can't really meet in Doctor Who, and yet here we've got them. And I am now excited to see where it
And
goes.
I like the Shooty Gatwa sequence, the last one. I think for me, he just about gets away with it. He doesn't
Right,
cross the
fair.
line, which is good. But for me, the really exciting sequence was the Kate Lethbridge Stewart
Oh,
kind
yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
brinksmanship with the Ghostbusters dog, where she's sort of not, and if you're watching it with one side of your brain, with the Doctor Who side of your brain, that's kind of, oh, she's being ruthless and steely like her father. Oh, this is a good thing because he's an asshole. But actually, it's exposing a lot about where she is at the moment in terms of Doctor Who and how
It's
she's kind
great.
of ruthless and she's abandoning people and it's kind of,
And it fits in with Ruby's storyline because it's that PTSD thing again. Because what has she
yeah.
gone through?
So suddenly,
But it also
all of these companions and children being recruited by UNIT sort of
starts to look sinister.
stops entirely seeming like, oh, they've given them a home. Donna's got a home. Mel's got a home, but
When Doctor
actually,
Who's cozy and
yeah,
about
and
aliens
actually,
and
it starts
stuff.
to feel like they're being used, and that makes me not necessarily interested about this series, but although I am, it makes me more interested about this is a good selling card
For the
for the
war
war between
between,
the
yeah.
land and the sea,
And
which
also,
before it wasn't, which before I was just thinking, oh, it's going to be a Torchwood sort of, you
yeah, yeah.
know, Children of Men kind of Grimfest. But
Or
actually,
Children of Earth, yeah, yeah.
if it's got complexity like this, then I'm up for it.
Well, and
Yeah, I
even
mean,
more complex is just the fact that that scene in the unit HQ where he comes in with the camera, but they've got the power, and then it's a case of does he fold, is the exact mirror of the scene in the village where unit turn up with the guns, and then when you reveal that he's got the camera, he's got the power, and do they fold? And at what point does that happen? I thought those two scenes worked really well as mirrors of each other because they're almost exactly the same situation with almost exactly the same cast list. And yet, in both instances, they're entirely the boot is on the other foot, as it were. I just thought that was a really interesting way to do that, and it worked really well.
yeah,
Sorry, John.
because he's on his home territory in the first, and they're on their home territory in the
Yeah, yeah,
second.
yeah.
Vader is, yeah. No, I think again what Matt was saying about Lancy, I was interested because I think this again going slightly back to the ending. Kablam got its critics for kind of the Doctor not taking Kablam down,
Yeah.
but I think this ending it makes me think that's a feature of that rather than a bug.
I
And I
thought it
think the
was a feature
chaotic,
of that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
it's a
always thought that
chaotic
was a
production there though. So this is
Yeah,
not so chaotic.
I think Kablam had the sort of moral complexity, but it was framed perhaps in a different
slightly
way. It
too
was a different
Yes.
sort
simplistically.
of
Yeah.
story. This has the moral complexity, and it kind of makes you think. I'm really interested to see, quite frankly, what other podcasters, who we may or may not listen to, what they think, because I think
Well, if it's
this
Joe
kind
Ford, he
of
loved it.
this kind of shifting complexity will make for a really interesting. I mean, it's got things you can say, and it's kind of last week's the whatever it was or Dwell. It seems to be really popular. So from what I've
Yeah.
read about it, it's atmospheric, it's creepy. Thank God Doctor Who's getting back to basics with this really creepy story, and
I
I
listened to
found it.
about 6 podcasts, 5 of which just raved about it, and then
Yeah,
one of which was about where we were with it, I think.
yeah, and I found it atmospheric and creepy, but superficial.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
actually, this has sort of made me feel better about the well because I think there's room for both. If Doctor Who can move from Lux, which is this mad sort of uh Looney Tunes kind of
Yeah, yeah.
self-referential thing, to the well, which is kind of superficial, atmospheric kind of jump scare, to this,
It's a
which has
standard
moral
Doctor. Yeah,
complexity,
it's a
then.
standard Doctor Who story. Well, I think it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
nicely scheduled this season.
yeah, yeah. So
It's,
I
it's
think
the same
I think it's going well.
it's the same sequence as we had last year, John.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know it
I
works.
think
Yeah, yeah.
it's doing better than last year. Although the 79 yards, 73 yards,
73
73
yards.
yards.
73 yards, I think was a very interesting story. But
But
actually, I think this is better
I
than
think
73 yards.
basically every episode this year, with the exception of The Well and Boom, has been a step up on its correspondent episode from last year, really.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
absolutely.
Lux was better than the Devil's Court. Maybe not a huge amount, but it was
yeah.
better. Robot Revolution was better than Space Babies, and this is better than 73 yards. 73 yards was probably the standout
Mm.
last year. Maybe Dot and Bubble, depending on your sensibility. But I think those two were the ones that really stood out last year. And this is better than 73 yards. I think it's significantly better, but probably that's a personal opinion given caveats.
I
So
think there
maybe
are
the
that. I think 73 yards is weirder and creepier, and
And narratively, it's looser.
yeah,
and it has less to say. I think
yeah.
what's really interesting, 73 yards does have some stuff to say, and it digs into that politician in that middle section, but it feels kind of superfluous to the story. Whereas here, the substance is the story, and so this feels like it has much more weight than seven. So as nice as 73 yards was, this feels like it has much more weight than that did, and that's all to the credit of this episode and Pete McTighe. Who knew after Kablam and wasn't it awful for
Praxis.
Apraxias? I know actually they're both good
Praxis is good.
episodes.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
I was going to
both
say.
good episodes. But I
Dylan's
don't
favorite episode. Remember?
right.
Yeah, but even so, they're good. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think either of them is entirely stellar. Whereas
Oh, I don't know. I do like Praxis, but I don't know if it's that era for me.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
when I really like in that era.
But I think this is a step up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, inarguably, I think this is a step up from what he's doing in those episodes. Those two felt like they, those two felt like they had things to say, but were slightly confused about how they said them. This
Yeah.
felt like maybe it's Russell T Davies's hand on his shoulder and said, "Right, you've got things to say. Maybe this is how you say them." And maybe Russell T Davies just has a slight. So we know that some Russell T Davies likes to keep things simple. Maybe that's what he needed because Chibnall likes to keep things, I think, likes to keep things a bit more ambiguous and textured. Maybe it just takes somebody like Russell T Davies to say, no, just put a nail in it, just say it.
It's a bit
And
more
maybe,
focused, I think, on that front. Yeah.
yeah,
We're,
absolutely.
we're in the years and years televisual universe as well, which is quite nice
Yeah.
because they are GB News was now Albion TV, which was
Oh,
the
yes,
name
I
of
got that. Yeah, yeah.
name of the Emma Thompson's dodgy
Vivian
porn
Rook.
party. Yeah,
Well, and also,
Yeah.
isn't that a connection with 73 yards as well? Because there was
prob-
a lot of stuff about,
probably.
yeah, I'm trying to remember.
Roger Atwillem's party.
Party, the
Yeah.
Albion party. So it's so it's kind of tying GB News to the government of the day in a way,
Yeah.
retrospectively,
Hmm.
retroactively rather. But yeah, it kind of does the same thing, which is another sort of reference to the reality we're currently living in. Well, not currently living in because we've got Labour now, but the most recent government before this one.
I mean, there's a thesis at some point about Russell T Davis's reaction against governments through his
Well,
era at
yeah.
Doctor Who, because he starts in the first series killing Tony Blair, and now the world has changed to such a degree that Tony Blair would be like the Doctor coming down from the heavens in Sound of Drums or whatever.
This series would all have been written under the previous government anyway, wouldn't it? So
It
it would be a
would, yeah,
reaction
yeah, yeah.
against them.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think you can see that, but also I every now and again. So and also there's a weird thing been happening this year, which I don't know if people have necessarily noticed, but I think every single episode this year, maybe maybe with the exception of the first one, has tied into something that's happening in the real world. So Russell T Davies clearly knew when he wanted these 8 episodes to go out,
Yes.
and everything so far. So I can't. Oh, I see. I don't make notes, and
Well,
I've not really thought about this. But there was something in Lux that was specific to that week. Maybe something to do with Easter. I can't remember. But there was something in Lux that was very specific to that weekend. And then last week's was tied into what was last week's tied into? It was tied into something that happened that weekend as well, wasn't it? And I can't remember.
well, I can't remember that.
But this week again is the council elections, and it's clearly making a point about that. I think, given that the last 2 episodes were both tied into things that were happening that weekend, that it can't be a coincidence that this one comes the week of the council elections that are, they always take place on the same weekend, right? Or the same
Hmm.
Thursday rather. So he probably looked in his diary at when these episodes were going to go out and thought, right, let's use that in certain ways with certain things. And I suspect that the sort of politics, the reason why he's got this one here and the politics of this might be to do with the council elections.
Possible, but it is
Yeah.
clearly also a reaction against. I mean, I'm thinking Piers Corbyn must be an influence. This kind of
Piers Morgan.
no
Corbyn.
Corbyn. So
Jeremy
Oh,
Corbyn's brother.
yes,
brother
Yeah.
yes.
who runs this kind of
Yeah,
reality group that denied COVID and believes that 4G masks or 5G masks are causing this, that, or the other, and they
yeah, yeah.
film people.
I think it's much like Joe Rogan, or I don't know.
Mhm.
I've never listened to Joe Rogan, but that kind of podcast, that right wing manosphere, the one for a
Sure,
better
yeah,
phrase for it.
absolutely. Oh yeah, like the
Which
influences on this are some really
Yeah.
interesting influences from the real
Yeah.
world.
which is also an interesting way because the story opens with you thinking, oh, he's got a Doctor Who fan doing a podcast. Hello. And then it ends with you realizing actually it's not a Doctor Who fan doing a podcast, it's Joe Rogan doing a podcast. It is that kind of
Well, it's probably, I
yeah,
don't know,
Conspiracist.
yeah.
Tharies or somebody, or what are these Doctor Who podcasters who also have mad
Oh,
conspiracies?
yeah, yeah, probably.
But you know what? It still makes me think that So I said earlier, so last year the finale, the very last episode, had the most generic Doctor Who title there's ever been, Empire of Death or whatever it was. And this year I said, so the last episode title also looks pretty generic in a kind of a, so okay, multiverse kind of a way. But if that multiverse of the reality war is the Doctor Who universe and the real world, I
That's
think
an interesting one, isn't it?
that's much more interesting than just, a sort of Doctor Strange kind of
And
multiverse
and
or
of course
whatever.
it would tie into the promotional material that we had before season two, with the Doctor going into different fictional universes.
Different, yeah, different fictional universes that are created by the same corporation that
Yeah,
creates its own fictional universe or whatever. Interesting things going on. And of course, so we've had this. So people have speculated about this in a, well, it couldn't really be because it's a bit of a mad stretch. That part of the reason why Russell T Davies has been talking up the idea that Doctor Who might go away is as part of the publicity for the sort of finale two-parter. Is Doctor Who going to go away? And then it turns out no, everything's fine at the end. So, but the one thing that makes me think, oh, maybe that is a deliberate ploy, is the Chris Chibnall one. Was it Flux? It was Flux, wasn't it?
yeah.
And before Flux, they had a thing where they switched off all of Doctor Who's social media for 24 hours. And all the fans on podcasts were saying, oh, those idiots, what the hell have they done? It's clearly a mistake. It's clearly somebody's made a terrible error and they've made this ridiculous, stupid thing happen. And they ought to know better and they ought to get over themselves and get on with it and stop being such dunces. And the rest of the world went, oh. And actually, that promotional campaign won a global award for promotional campaigns because of how daring it was and because of what, the effect it had on an actual audience of regular people who just sort of went, oh. Now, I'm not saying that Russell T Davies is going, oh, Doctor Who's a bit like Robin Hood now. It could come back at any time as part of a promotional campaign for this series. But this episode does kind of make me go, you know, there's maybe a bit more to that than I thought there was, an hour and a half ago before I sat down to watch this. So who knows? It's the kind of thing where, because this episode feels truly, properly metatextual, in the way I've said, it's about the television series rubbing up against actual reality rather than fictional reality. It just makes you think that there's something a bit more serious going on here overall. And it's not just this episode, but it's more than this episode.
The only thing I would say about that is for a marketing campaign to sort of play with the idea of the cancellation of a series, I think that's a bit of a live wire
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of certainly in the past, because actors' contracts, the stock of the series, you know, these things are influenced by news and whether
Yes.
a series is coming back or not. And
It's
so
Eric
playing with
Saywood
that
trial
idea,
of a Time Lord territory, isn't it?
well, yeah, or
Yeah,
it's,
but the
and
producer
I'm
stood
trying to
on it.
think of an example. So certainly in the old series, like actors, I'm imagining wanted to make it very clear that they were available for pantomime in the winter. And so they would probably be against any sort of ambiguity about their ongoing employment. And so I think there's a degree of sort of,
Having said
sensitivity
that,
about it.
a lot of that can take place behind closed doors because it's all about agents and casting
Yeah, yeah,
agents, isn't it? So,
yeah. But,
that kind of thing could happen and we just wouldn't know about it. So,
yeah,
Well, look at the casting process with doctors. How much do we know about that in recent years? They've
yeah.
very,
kept it really quiet.
yeah, we sometimes find out a bit afterwards, but very rarely, really. And we certainly don't. All of the last few Doctors really basically have been a surprise, even if the names have turned up just before the announcement. Up until 24, 48 hours before the announcement, oftentimes the names haven't even been mentioned, let alone been a big part of the conversation. So, yeah.
I mean, the BBC should run the US's foreign policy unit because their ability to keep secrets, even using WhatsApp, is extraordinary.
Yes, I'm waiting for the day when we get included on the BBC production officer's
Hmm.
WhatsApp threads, but it
by
just hasn't happened
accident.
yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, although we have heard a few things about,
Yeah.
and we've talked about those things as well, even as far back as January. Right, is there anything more either of you wants to say about this? I feels like we've barely scratched the surface of it in some ways, but I mean, you can only talk so much, I think, as well.
Yeah, and well, I mean, the thing I did like again was how good is Millie Gibson at carrying an episode? I think she's better carrying an episode by herself than she is interacting with Judy Gatwa because they are
Yes.
both high energy performers.
Yeah, I've said this before, haven't I? I think they
Yeah,
bring out the not. It's settling it wrong to say the worst in each other, but I think they both make the other heighten their performance.
it's the energy, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
between
think
them.
it's
without him,
Gatwa's,
she's great, and without her, he's great.
but I think it's Gatwa more. I think Gatwa has this sort of performing style that kind of works, but not not all the time. I think it's sort of almost like David Tennant.
I'm never
It's
convinced he
sort of
really
overwhelming.
exists. You're
Yeah.
never convinced he really exists. You're always looking at a performance. I felt the same about David Tennant,
Mhm.
except in that one scene at the end of this. And actually, true, probably more or less that one scene at the end of 73, no, Dot and
Dom
Bubble as
Bubble.
well.
Hmm.
Yeah, where it actually feels like a real person. He actually feels like a real person. And I know he's a Time Lord, so you can sort of say, oh, he wouldn't behave. But you have to be convinced that the person in front of you really exists.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you don't suspend your reality or suspend your disbelief, sorry. And this episode, it was much easier to suspend your disbelief for than for many of the episodes over the last year or so. And the bits where you didn't suspend your disbelief, like I say, when the two aliens just look like blokes in costumes.
Yeah.
Look how that turns out. So, I mean, even that was deliberate too, right? So this
Yeah.
episode was achieving on most fronts, I would say. A couple of caveats, but again, as we've talked through, they may have been deliberate choices anyway, really. And so last week's episode, I rewatched The Well, and I was so bored by it, I actually fell asleep at the half hour point and missed the last quarter of an hour. And who would have imagined that you could be so bored by an episode like that? But I mean, even the shock tactics of well, because I was screenshotting it. I was so bored, I was screenshotting it and sending you pictures of the monster because I was so bored, and it really wasn't working for me the second time at all. I can't see that being as true of this. In fact, the second time I watch this, I will be really looking forward to seeing that final scene again and probably enjoying a
Oh,
lot of the journey of the way to get there, I think.
well, I said if we haven't been podcasting, we'll be watching it again now because Carolyn wanted to rewatch it a few times. She had to go and do
Why
shopping
bet?
and stuff,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
It's the kind of episode where you want to see the threads pulling together
you're buzzing up. Yeah, I
and where
have
you
you.
want to see,
You
like I say, those two scenes that mirror each other. Now I want to go back to that and see just how much of a mirror they are on each other because it felt at the time like a really sort of not brave's not the word, but not the word, but a really sort of robust and unusual piece of storytelling to do something that direct.
yeah.
Really interesting. Do you want to score it then?
Okay.
Do you want me to start? I'm not going
Okay.
10. I don't think it's quite a 10. I think it's still RTD2 era Doctor Who. And so there's still a couple of things that I'm not entirely sure about, but it's a 9. I think it's as strong an episode as we've seen since he's come back, frankly. Matt?
I think it's a 10
Yeah,
because
fair
I
enough.
think it's going to be a pretty pivotal. It's going to be a pivotal episode more than it appears on the screen.
Yeah.
I think it actually explains a lot of RTD's approach over the past 2 years and kind of reconciles it with his original approach, and also
It makes
brings
sense of
in
it. Yeah,
brings
yeah.
in Chibnall's approach as well. So actually, I'm starting to understand RTD this time. Um, and I think Pete McTighe, it's much better written than Kablam. It's written. It's the first time I've watched a Doctor Who in ages that looks as though it's actually been written at someone's leisure and constructed carefully. and intricately.
Yeah.
And it's made me excited about the standalone unit series, which before I was kind of looking forward to, but it felt a bit like well, they don't have Gatwa. They want to make up the episodes, so it's going to be a filler series. Now it feels like I can start to see what sort of complexity it might have.
And actually, this is, I think, the first time that we've had substance, maybe apart from Dot and Bubble again, actually, where we've had substance and they've dug into the substance rather than just telling, oh, this is a story about an incel. And
Yeah.
they tell you that at the end because you didn't realize it was a story about an incel because there's nothing about an incel in the story, frankly. For the first, what feels like the first time, certainly apart from Dot and Bubble, they've had substance and they've actually dug into it and told a story about it. John, what's your score?
I was wavering between 9 and 10 as well, but I think I will go for a 10 again because I think it's made me think of better of Pete McTighe's previous stories, and I did particularly like Perseus as well. And it knows exactly what it's doing. It's echoing up as Doctor Who's. It's reflecting those kind of themes of what is reality on a fractal level on every kind of element of the story. And yeah, I say I was really happy to see Millie Gibson just given an absolute dream of a script for her. I think as an actor, you see that, and my God, so much you can play with. So yeah, I'll 10 for me.
And it's made
It's
me
also
excited about the war between the land and the sea,
well,
which I've got to say I hadn't been up until this point.
it's also for the first time in years made me interested in hearing what other Doctor Who podcasters
Yeah,
think
yeah.
about it. Because
Yeah,
before I don't give a shit about other Doctor Who podcasters. I occasionally dip in and out, but this time I actually want to find out
yeah.
if they've kind of, if they're similarly minded to the complexities of this. I kind of hope that it's 50-50. I hope that a lot of
You
them
hope that
hate.
ours is the best,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
obviously. Well, yeah.
Yeah, the reaction I've seen, it's going down really well at the minute.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah. Well, that's good.
Well, and next week then we're in Cardiff, Dublin
Nigeria.
for Nigeria.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also for a story that looks interesting. Because next week looks to be a story about storytelling. But it's also a story about people who are going missing. Well, I mean, from the trailer, a story about people who are going missing, but they don't go missing because they have been disappeared. They still exist, but they exist in this liminal space between fiction and reality. Maybe. I don't know. That's what I was sort of getting from the trailer, which makes me think that that's a theme that's developing now, this difference, this liminal space between fiction and reality.
Well, it's
And, you
also
know,
when he kind of tackled in Last of the Time Lords as well, because that's an episode all about stories and storytelling.
last last of the Time Lords.
Yeah. It's because
Yeah,
Martha
I suppose.
got
Yeah,
rid
yeah,
of the
yeah,
world,
yeah.
and yeah, it's the big tale, telling
Christ, John, you
stories.
make me
So
think back 18 years. That wasn't
I
easy.
know.
I've got an old brain. Right, we'll be back next week for what's next week called? The Story in the Engine.
Yeah.
Love that title. It's just one word away from the title of a book I wrote. Until then, I was JR,
I was John.
And I was Matt.
and we will speak again soon.